Can a single curve destroy the full weekend of a Formula One team? How do you explain that two top pilots like Leclerc and Hamilton end up colliding at the same point on the circuit? What happened with Ferrari in Zandvoort was a real disaster that left a mark in the 2025 season. Today I tell you everything in detail. The GP of the Netherlands 2025 was not any career in the calendar. Zandvoort, with his high-load curves, his extreme pair and brutal closeness between asphalt and barriers, had already gained fame as one of the most demanding paths of the championship. But this edition hid an even greater danger: weather unpredictability. Since Thursday, the predictions talked about intermittent showers and bursts of coastal wind that would affect adherence in key sectors. Ferrari knew it. The team had arrived with the hope of consolidating its progress after the first quotes of the calendar, but they knew that any track or strategy error could ruin everything. The weekend had begun with positive signals. Both Hamilton and Leclerc showed consistency in the race pace during the practices, and the team opted for a configuration with greater aerodynamic load, trusting that the additional grip would be an advantage if the weather became adverse. However, that also made them more vulnerable to flying up if the track did not drain well. The technical decisions in Ferrari, as many times in their recent history, were taken with ambition, but with a minimum security margin. Already on Sunday, the tension was palpable. The atmosphere was charged, literally and figuratively. The gray clouds moved at high speed over the North Sea, and although the race started dry, the air was saturated with moisture. The engineers monitored the climate radar every return, knowing that a sudden change could force last-minute decisions in boxes. Zandvoort does not forgive mistakes, let alone if they occur in variable conditions. History has demonstrated it year after year. It is a clue that punishes more uncertainty than speed. In that context, Hamilton had been signing an intelligent career. He carried a controlled rhythm, managing his tires, adjusting the differential and preparing for a possible undercut about Russell. But when the sky began to spit small drops on the asphalt, chaos slipped silently in the equation. And it happened just where all the engineers feared, in the Curve 3. That pair that visually impresses, but that aerodynamically is a trap. The lateral inclination requires surgical precision, and it is enough for a wheel to touch the wet paint so that physics decides the result. Hamilton, experienced as few, entered with decision. But the traction faded in milliseconds. It was a brutal moment. The rear of the SF-25 lost grip without warning. The correction was instinctive, impeccable, but useless. The car bounced on the outer line and went directly to the barriers with the right side, leaving Ferrari stunned on the wall. All for a combination of apparently minor factors: a minimum drop, an apex of paint, and the need to push when everything was at stake. For Hamilton, it was more than an accident. It was the confirmation that the SF-25 is still a complex machine, unpredictable under pressure, even for a seven-title champion. Ferrari's day was already bitter after Hamilton's accident, but there was still a concrete hope of saving important points: Charles Leclerc. The Monegasco pilot had maintained a calculated race, without major shocks, oscillating between the 4th and 6th position, depending on the strategic moment. Leclerc was executing a race that, without being spectacular, was exactly what the team needed after Hamilton's decline. Control, consistency, and intelligent management of the average tire, all oriented to a second half of the most aggressive race. But that strategy was completely altered by a variable out of its control: the appearance of the safety car. Just after its stop in boxes, which was designed to get it ahead of several rivals with more spent tires, the security car was displayed due to the abandonment of his partner. This intervention left him at immediate tactical disadvantage. While their rivals received a free stop, Leclerc returned to the track trapped behind a car train without being able to recover the lost time. And then the inevitable happened. The emotional state was contaminated. Radio frustration was visceral, a sincere shout of impotence that reflected all the accumulated weight of decisions outside its control. And yet he kept fighting. What happened in Vuelta 53 was a perfect reflection of chaos that can arise when competitive pressure exceeds the technical judgment. In the same curve where Hamilton had injured, a new protagonist appeared: Kimi Antonelli, the young Mercedes' talent. The Italian, anxious to demonstrate his aggressiveness and talent in the eyes of the paddock, saw in Leclerc a clear opportunity to advance inside the Peralta. And although the maneuver had logic from the competitive point of view, its execution was clumsy. He underestimated the input speed, overestimated his braking capacity, and worst of all, he ignored the technical complexity of that curve, especially in track conditions even with residual humidity. The result was devastating. The Mercedes fully hit the left back of the Ferrari, a blow to the most delicate point of the rear axle that turned the SF25 into a passenger without control. Leclerc had no time to correct. The car slid without resistance to barriers, impacting violently. From the cabin, there was no room for doubts. The car was destroyed and the race finished. For Ferrari, it was the double blow. For Leclerc, it was the confirmation that luck and perhaps respect on the track was not on his side. The official reaction was immediate. Antonelli received a penalty of 10 seconds for provoking the accident, in addition to another 5 seconds for speeding in boxes. But that did not return the lost points, much less repaired moral damage. Leclerc, without containing himself, was direct in his evaluation. It is a Kimi error. Here you have to be aggressive to advance, yes, but also have a head. You cannot put the car in each hole without measuring the consequences. What hurts the most in this story is not the physical impact against barriers, but the symbolic. Ferrari lost both pilots in the same curve in different circumstances, but with the same route. The lack of control in a race that demanded cold blood. And Leclerc, for more experience he has, was once again a victim of a situation that escapes his direct responsibility. A story that seems to be repeated again and again in his career. The consequences of the GP of Netherlands 2025 were not limited to the results in the points table. For Ferrari, the real impact was psychological, structural, and narrative. Because when a historical team like the Scuderia suffers a double abandonment in the same curve, with both cars were due to different causes, the reaction cannot only be technical. It must be existential. And that was exactly what was lived inside in Maranello after the race. Lewis Hamilton, even with the 17-year accumulated experience in the category, is no stranger to error. But his tone on the radio that, "I'm very sorry guys," was not a simple apology, but a reflection of something much deeper. A mixture of personal disappointment and shared responsibility. Because the British knew that his accident was not just a piloting failure. It was also the symptom of a car hard to tame, an aggressive tuning on a track that does not forgive, and a latent pressure that has accompanied him since he signed with Ferrari. His subsequent analysis was technical, honest, and content. He admitted that he had lost the rear for touching the paint in the Perrault, that the car was nervous, and that there was nothing more than could do once the loss of traction began. But he also left a key reflection. Until that moment, the weekend had been solid, and that is what really hurts. The potential was there. The disaster was a surprise. Leclerc, on the other hand, reacted with the viscerality of someone who has already lived too many times the sinsabor of seeing how everything escapes for external factors. His radio message when safety car appeared after Hamilton's abandonment was an emotional explosion. Frustration for a disastrous timing that left him vulnerable, helplessness for not being able to control strategic decisions, and anger for seeing a potentially podium career of Dodge to evaporate completely. And that was before his accident. After the impact with Antonelli, the tone changed, but the tension continued. His evaluation was clear, direct, without space for cynicism. It was an error of Antonelli. Badly calibrated aggressiveness. But beyond the individual reactions, what was lived in the Ferrari garage after the race was a true emotional earthquake. The engineers were dejected, the coaching staff analyzed data with disbelief faces, and Frédéric Vasseur, team director, avoided prolonged statements before the media. The feeling was not just disappointment, it was exposure. Because this type of careers not only take away points, they leave you naked. They show where the weak seams of your operational, technical, and emotional structure are. Ferrari had arrived in Zandvoort with the intention of confirming his place in the fight for the championship. He left with 0 points, 2 broken cars, a sanction to his rival, and a media account that put them back in the center of criticism. Because it does not matter if the errors were from the pilot or others. The collective narrative already places them as a team that, when it is played more, is broken. And there is the real problem. Not only is it about repairing cars or checking telemetries, it is about rebuilding trust, both internal and external. Ferrari is in a season where the luxury of doubt cannot be allowed. With a competitive car, 2 first-level pilots, and an insatiable historical demand, any stumbling block such as Zandvoort's is not just a bad result. It is an existential threat to its credibility as a contender to the title. Words can temporarily soothe the noise. But in Formula One, only the results are really silenced. And right now, Ferrari has a very big debt with his promises. And now it's your turn. After seeing how Ferrari lost not only a career, but the opportunity to affirm his status as a true contender to the title, the question is inevitable. Can this team recover from such a deep fall? Or are we witnessing another season in which brilliant promises fade out due to poorly executed decisions, under pressure errors, and a chronic disability to close critical weekends? Think about the context. Two pilots with experience, speed, and hunger of victory, both were in the same curve. A car that has shown to have a rhythm in classification, but that becomes treacherous under mixed conditions. And a team that, despite clear advances compared to previous years, still does not seem to have exorcised its oldest demons: strategic errors, the lack of tactical adaptation, and emotional vulnerability when the championship really begins to demand. Are we being too hard with Ferrari? Or, on the contrary, this demand is part of the legacy that they themselves helped to build? The history of the most emblematic team of Formula One is not written with half inks, and what has happened in Zandvoort is far from being a simple stumble. Leave me your analysis in the comments. Who do you think has greater responsibility in what happened? Hamilton for your mistake in changing conditions? Antonelli for a poorly executed maneuver? Or Ferrari for not having answers on time when everything began to crumble?